This is not just a story about fraud. It's a story about how the belief in changing the world blinded the most astute investors and made them forget the most important question. Does the technology even work? For a decade, Elizabeth Holmes was building not a technology company, but an elaborate illusion, backed by the authority of the world's most powerful people, the fear of employees, and an incredible faith in the narrative of a genius who was too far ahead of her time.
In 2003, a 19-year-old chemistry student dropped out of Stanford University. Her decision was not driven by poor grades. On the contrary, her professors predicted a brilliant future for her. The reason was different. Elizabeth Holmes was obsessed with an idea that, in her opinion, brooked no delay. She founded Theranos, a company whose name was derived from the words therapy and diagnosis. Her promise was simple and grand: to revolutionize blood testing, making it fast, cheap, and almost painless.
Just a few years later, all the leading business publications were writing about the new Steve Jobs. Holmes didn't just adopt his style, black turtlenecks, minimalism. She copied his manner of speech, his charisma, and his ruthless belief in his own exceptionalism. On her desk stood a quote allegedly said about her by Henry Kissinger. Elizabeth Holmes has a quality that is found in people who change the world. She does not take no for an answer. She became the world's youngest self-made female billionaire, built on a paper valuation of the company at $10 billion. But behind this facade of genius lay a troubling reality. The technology that promised to change medicine did not work. And rumors that a grand deception was hidden behind the fashionable innovation were already beginning to seep through the iron walls of secrecy erected around Theranos.
Holmes' ability to attract investment and patronage was phenomenal. During its existence, Theranos raised over $900 million from investors, including media mogul Rupert Murdoch, the Walton family, owners of Walmart, as well as former Secretaries of State George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, and former Secretary of Defense James Mattis. This was not just a list of investors, it was a list of institutions whose names embodied power and influence. They became a living shield for the company, inadvertently legitimizing it in the eyes of the rest of the world.
The mechanism of deception was built on several pillars. First, the creation of the myth of a genius. Holmes masterfully used her story, a young woman who dropped out of Stanford, to challenge industry giants like Siemens and Quest Diagnostics. Second, total secrecy. The Edison device and its successor, the Minilab 4S, were shrouded in such an aura of mystery that even potential investors couldn't properly study them. Instead of demonstrating a working prototype, Holmes used rhetoric full of complex but vague terms and appealed to the mission: saving lives.
Interestingly, many members of the board of directors knew George Shultz personally, and his grandson, Tyler Shultz, became one of the first and most principled whistleblowers, risking his career and his family's fortune to reveal the truth. Later, some investors admitted they were blinded by Holmes's personality and didn't ask the tough questions. A telling story goes that to convince venture capitalist Timothy Draper, Holmes needed just one phone call and a meeting. Draper, known for his insight, later said he was captivated by her vision and confidence. It was a classic case of narrative defeating reality. The more influential people Holmes attracted, the higher her status grew in the public eye. She could be trusted almost automatically. At the heart of Theranos' promise was a simple and powerful idea: a device called Edison, the size of a small printer that could perform hundreds of different medical tests from just a few drops of blood from a finger prick. This promised an end to painful venous blood draws, fast results, and early diagnosis of diseases. However, behind this beautiful facade lay a harsh truth.
Theranos never created a single, stable working prototype capable of doing what it promised. The devices consistently produced erroneous results, were unstable in operation, and could not pass basic validation procedures. When it was necessary to demonstrate the technology, the company used standard, modified laboratory equipment from other manufacturers, carefully disguised as its own development.
It is noteworthy that Holmes had a pathological fear of needles and venous blood draws since childhood. This became one of the personal drivers of her idea. Unfortunately, the desire to rid the world of this problem was not supported by scientific capabilities.
The most terrible consequence of this lie was the human dimension of the tragedy. In a number of cases, doctors, relying on Theranos tests, made false or dangerous diagnoses. There were recorded instances where healthy patients received results incompatible with life, false positive tests for cancer or HIV. One patient, after receiving an erroneous HIV diagnosis, started taking powerful antiretroviral drugs, causing serious harm to a healthy body. Others, conversely, were prevented from starting necessary treatment by false negative results. The company was gambling not with investors' money, but with the health and lives of ordinary people. As one former employee aptly noted, the more influential people Holmes attracted, the higher her status grew in the public eye. She could be trusted. Unfortunately, that trust proved fatal.
To maintain the illusion, Theranos built one of the most repressive corporate cultures in the history of Silicon Valley. The company functioned like a totalitarian state where the main enemies were truth and transparency. All employees signed strict non-disclosure agreements that threatened them with ruinous lawsuits for the slightest leak. Departments were strictly isolated from each other. Engineers working on the hardware did not have access to the data produced by their own machines, and analytical chemists could not understand why the results fluctuated so wildly. Employees who were dissatisfied or asked uncomfortable questions were immediately fired and were often pursued by threats from a battery of highly paid company lawyers.
Curiously, people were officially forbidden from listing on their LinkedIn profiles that they worked at Theranos to reduce the risk of leaks and make it harder for journalists and inspectors to find former employees. A personal drama was unfolding in parallel. Sunny Belwani, Holmes's partner who was 20 years her senior and had no medical background, served as chief operating officer. According to employee testimony, Belwani not only managed operations, but also psychologically controlled Holmes, creating a toxic environment of total submission and fear. He personally oversaw dismissals and could destroy a person's career with one phone call.
Rumors suggested that when the Wall Street Journal began preparing an exposé, Holmes and Belwani launched a veritable witch hunt for the rat, conducting internal investigations. The irony was that on the office walls hung an inspirational quote, "Don't let anyone tell you that you can't." In practice, it meant, "Don't let anyone tell you that you are lying."
The collapse began not with a loud statement from regulators, but with the quiet, methodical work of a journalist. In 2015, John Kerry Yu of the Wall Street Journal, having received tips from skeptical doctors and former employees, including medical biochemist Adam Klein and investor's grandson Tyler Schultz, began his own investigation. He was opposed not just by a company, but by a well-oiled PR machine ready for anything. It is known that before the publication of the exposé, Theranos lawyers personally visited the WSJ's editor-in-chief, threatening lawsuits and the destruction of the publication's reputation. Pressure was applied at the highest level. Rupert Murdoch himself, whose News Corp owned the WSJ and had invested $125 million in Theranos, reportedly called the editorial office trying to stop the publication. But the newspaper maintained its editorial independence.
The publication in October 2015 was a bombshell.
Careyrou's article detailed that Theranos' technology was unreliable and that the company primarily used modified equipment from other manufacturers. In response, Theranos launched an aggressive counter-campaign. Holmes went on the popular TV show Jim Cramer's Mad Money, calling the article defamatory. The PR team sent letters to investors and partners trying to discredit Careyroux and his sources. This period was later referred to within the company as a state of siege. But it was too late. The avalanche had been set in motion.
After the Wall Street Journal article, the company was hit by a chain reaction of irreversible events, revealing the full depth of its fall.
First came the regulatory inspections. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, conducted unannounced inspections of Theranos laboratories. Their reports were devastating. They revealed gross protocol violations, a lack of quality control, and the use of unvalidated equipment.
Then, in 2016, Theranos was forced to void tens of thousands of test results, admitting they might have been inaccurate. This was a direct blow to patients.
Its largest partner, the Walgreens pharmacy chain, which had launched blood draw centers in its stores, terminated its contract and filed a $140 million lawsuit.
A flood of collective lawsuits followed from investors who had been deceived by false statements about the state of the technology and the company's financial performance.
Federal and state regulators revoked the licenses of Theranos laboratories, banning Holmes from operating a medical business for several years. It is also known that Holmes and Balwani spent investor funds on personal expenses, including luxury travel, five-star hotel stays, and personal drivers. In 2018, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, charged them with massive fraud.
The final act of the drama played out in a federal court in San Jose. The trial of Elizabeth Holmes became a media sensation. In 2022, she was found guilty on 4 counts of fraud. In November of that year, Judge Edward Davila sentenced her to 11 years and 3 months in prison.
In court, Holmes, attempting to mitigate her guilt, partially admitted her mistakes, stating that she felt deep pain for what people had gone through because she had failed and felt such humiliation from that failure. She tried to present herself as a naive idealist, absorbed in her mission, but the court and the jury saw a calculating fraudster.
A quote from investor Rupert Murdoch sounded like a verdict on an entire era. "Of course it was a fraud, but I am only guilty of not asking questions." In this admission lies the essence of a systemic failure. The Theranos story remains the biggest mistake not only of Holmes, but also of civilization's leaders, blinded by the promise of a quick technological victory.
After Theranos, Silicon Valley, albeit briefly, sobered up. Venture capitalists began to involve independent technical experts more often for due diligence. The Steve Jobs factor ceased to be an unconditional pass for funding. The era of blind faith in charismatic leaders whose narratives were stronger than their products ended, giving way, albeit not completely, to an era of verification. Theranos became a costly but vital lesson. Technology that promises to change the world must work, and behind genius, one must always see the human being.
Subscribe to Business Obituaries. We're cooking up new stories of epic failures for you. Your like helps this channel grow.